No alarm sounded in the prismatic galleries of Solemnis. No augur flashed. No cryptek warned. There was only a sound that should not have been possible. A sound that did not travel through space or time or metal, but bled through stasis. Clang, one note, one toll, one warning. In the vaults where silence had reigned for millennia, something ancient began to move. Not a war machine, not a warrior. A bell. Forged from iron extracted from a saint's blood, reforged under visions, sanctified in a crusade that died screaming. The bell of Gerstal had rung once before, in the shadow of the 12th Black Crusade. That time, it had vanished before it could fall into traitor hands. Now, suspended in Trazyn the Infinite's gallery, behind layers of quantum lock, phase shielding and chrono suspension, it began to swing. At first it moved like memory, a tremble, a sway. Then came the second toll. Clang. The sound moved like prophecy. Scarab ceased maintenance mid-stride. Stasis fields cracked and fluttered. A rank of stilled Chimera tanks shorted out in silence. Nothing should have moved in solemnness. But this was not movement. This was destiny, unstuck. A relic of the Cadian Gate had begun to bleed. Trazyn, the Necron overlord, the archivist of dead wars and extinct beliefs, detected the vibration too late. By the time he transferred his consciousness into a Lich-Guard surrogate, his vault doors were already buckling. He did not scream when they fell. He simply transferred again. As the bell's swings widened, blood, fresh, red, human, flung outward from a surface that had not touched life in centuries. It splashed against holograms, burst against trench mock-ups, slicked down the armatures of vitrified laser guns. A stasis-locked battle sister's corpse, preserved in deathless devotion, wept crimson from the eye. And when the fifth toll echoed, clang, the vibration reached Cadian orbit. Down in the black tunnels of Eriad 6, Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cawl paused his excavation of buried Blackstone. The probe he had sent, delicate, pure, and surgically calibrated, went dark. Static bled into his mind like frostbite. Eldari shadows appeared behind him. Rhymed warnings followed, prophecy dressed as madness. The bell tolled again. Clang, 6. He did not understand what was waking. He only knew that something had broken containment. Back on Cadia, inside the twin spires of the Shrine of St. Maurican, the Sororitas knelt in silence. The canonesses, twins in armor, divided by doctrine, stood beneath the great cast bell that crowned their city. It moved not an inch, and yet the chamber shook. Clang. 7. The vibrations passed through sanctified Rockreet and Ferrocrete foundations, through cassers and war relics and vox repeaters. It passed through the faith of the faithful, and kept going. Marshal Amalrich of the Black Templars stood atop a mound of traitor corpses, drenched in plasma ash and promethium fire. The dropship that tried to flee Cadia exploded in mid-air. His banner snapped like a thunderclap in the heatwave of its death. Below, the heretics were ash. Behind him, Castellan Maudlead drove the Cruxis Crusade standard into the wreckage and turned to face the next wave. There wasn't one. No more foes came. The silence after battle was broken, not by retreat, but by a vibration in the bones. Not a call to arms, a reminder. Clang. 8. In the air above the shattered Khazars, Captain Hannah Kestrel of the 89th Combat Picked Recon snapped her Avenger strike fighter out of a 1,000-foot dive and streaked across the moorlands. Beneath her, traitor armor fell back in panicked formation. The heretics were retreating. Kestrel blinked in disbelief. They had won. Behind her, her co-pilot Darvus whooped over the Vox. They're pulling back. Kez, they're actually pulling back. She didn't celebrate. Something was wrong. Clang. 9. In the hold of a Chimera transport en route to the front, Major Marda Helska received new orders. Her unit, green, eager, Cadian to the bone, had been rerouted. The war was over. The heretics were gone. They were being sent back. Laughter, disbelief, bitterness. They hadn't even fired a shot. She pressed her gloved hand to the cold hull and felt it. Not movement. A resonance. A sound coming from inside the world itself. Clang. 10. Trazyn tried to escape. His gallery had begun to collapse in on itself, the necrodermis failing at compression points he had never mapped. Time rippled, history twisted. The pasts he had preserved screamed in digital agony. The bell was still moving. Blood flew like rain. Sanet, his cryptech, could not explain the phenomenon. "The stasis field is still active," he stammered. "The movement should be impossible." "It's not movement," Trazyn growled. "It's warpcraft." He saw it then. The bell wasn't ringing. It was summoning. Far from Cadia, aboard a vessel unmoored from reality, Dravura Morkath stepped aside from the viewports. Behind her, the Warmaster of Chaos sat upon a throne not built for mortals. Abaddon had returned. And as the 13th Black Crusade came to its moment of truth, he did not smile. He did not gloat. He watched the stars shift in real time. "The constellations have changed," he murmured. "It is open now." "What is, my lord?" she asked. He did not answer, because there was nothing else to say. Clang. 11. In Casa Kraf, soldiers popped corks and sang victory hymns. Commissars lit Iho sticks. Drunk shock troopers scrawled Cadia stands on armor panels and promethium drums. Sergeant Kell refused to drink. Creed wasn't smiling. "This isn't over," the Castellan muttered, staring at the sky like a man waiting for something only he could hear. "Where is Abaddon?" he asked, to no one in particular. And then, somewhere far below the fortress's bedrock, Clang. 12. In a basement off Enfilade Street, a woman with cataract eyes opened a box she had been told never to open. Inside, something breathed. A cultist choir began to sing. Their teeth fell out one by one. Their eyes turned black. And in the basement vault of an old hab designed to hold munitions, something made from memory, rot, and prophecy took its first real breath in 1,000 years. Outside, the fireworks exploded in a blood-colored sky. Above them all, the sound rang out again. Clang. 13. Cadia had known war for so long that peace felt like sedition. So when word spread that the 13th Black Crusade was over, it didn't come with parades. It came with disbelief. Not even the most cynical drill abbots could silence it. Not even the commissars could suppress the smiles. The enemy was retreating, confirmed, logged, echoed across vox grids. Entire formations of traitor regiments, broken, beaten, fleeing. No more demonic war engines crawling across the plains of Myrak. No more bombardments on the storm-racked moors of Kraf. The siege had cracked. Cadia still stood. In the manufactorums, servitors paused mid-pattern to bless themselves. In the ecclesiarchal halls, priests spoke of miracles without irony. In the hab blocks, soldiers let themselves cry for the first time in memory. Ammunition was locked away. Orders to reinforce casas were cancelled. Armoured columns turned around mid-march and began the slow crawl back to base. They didn't know that was the last time they'd see those roads intact. In Casa Kraf, under torchlight and auric banners, the War Council met to dissolve itself. Supreme Commissar Zabine was already drafting orders to reduce wartime rationing restrictions. Logistar General Rake spoke of transitioning from defensive war economy to infrastructural recovery. Parliamentarians in the military diet whispered about deposing Creed, formally this time, not through veiled procedural sabotage, but with a peacetime vote. The Lord Castellan, flanked by Sergeant Kell, leaned against a war map covered in ash, wine rings, and cigar burns. He said nothing, not because he had no orders, but because no one would follow them. The others had already moved on. Zabine offered praise in the form of exile. Your emergency tenure is no longer needed. The Diet will appoint a supreme commander. You'll still command the forces of Cadia, but with oversight. Creed puffed his Iho stick and didn't answer. She mistook that for agreement. Across the casas, soldiers celebrated without discipline. They poured contraband amasec. They tore their flat collars open. Some even laid down their laser guns, openly, defiantly, like they were turning over a page in history. On rooftops, children born in void refugee zones waved Cadian banners they'd never seen fly in their lifetimes. Tech priests raised their mechanical limbs in salute. Pilots performed aerial loops in aging fighters that should have been grounded. The Martian protocols blinked red with risk warnings, but none were followed. The joy was total, and it was hollow. Down below the Habs and Casa towers, in the carved-out veins of Cadia's subterranean grid, something stirred. In ancient Munitorum basements once sealed by tectonic foldlocks, cultists began their songs. Not loud, not dissonant, just in time. They weren't awakening, they were activating. Jan Rovetsky, once a child of privilege turned heretic agent, moved through the revelers in silence. His uniform was clean. His collar bore a sergeant's chevron. He blended imperfectly with the support crews of the interior guard. He smiled at a white shield who ran past with an Iho stick between her teeth. He nodded at a preacher ranting about the Emperor's mercy. Then he went underground and opened a box. And something inside began to hum. On the Voxnet, someone played the hymn, Flower of Cadia, again and again. It became a chorus, a rhythm, an infection. Creed told Kel to turn it off. Kel didn't. "What are they singing?" Creed asked, already knowing. "They think we won," Kel said. Up in orbit, Celestine floated among the wreckage of hundreds of enemy ships. Her wings were scorched, her armor cracked. Her eyes, ancient and unfathomable, did not blink. The living saint had watched worlds burn without mourning, but not this one. Cadia was still alive, but she could hear something rising from below. Not warp screams, not demonic cries. A sound from the core, from deep beneath the surface, something old. When Admiral Minzet reported that the vengeful spirit had fled, the military diet finally declared it official. The Black Crusade had failed. Abaddon had run. They passed a resolution naming Ursakar Creed a transitional leader. They scheduled an emergency vote for his dismissal. They began drafting reconstruction policy for Kazas that no longer existed. Reich even proposed increasing civilian ration quotas. Zabine ordered all executions related to morale offences to be temporarily suspended. "Let the soldiers celebrate," she said. "Let them feel victory." Creed said nothing. The airfields filled with victory formations, flyovers, honour drills, ceremonial rifle salutes. A trio of Kasserkin veterans painted the word "stands" across the flank of a damaged Valkyrie. They posed beside it for pict recorders. They did not notice the hairline fracture running across the ferrocrete beneath their boots. No one noticed the seismic shifts. Not yet. In the old spires of command, Creed finally turned to Kel. "Something is wrong," he said. Kel already knew. "Do I raise the alerts?" Creed shook his head. "They wouldn't believe it. Not until it's too late." Kel hesitated. "Then what do we do?" Creed exhaled smoke into the map of the sector and watched the ash swirl like a storm system. "We buy time," he said, "and we start listening for the sound no one else hears." Kel didn't ask what sound. Because the bell had rung 13 times. Far from the revelry, where the orbital shells still lay embedded in the crust, where demon prints had not yet faded from scorched city stone, where lasgun ash still drifted like pollen, the first cracks widened. One by one, slow, invisible, total, and through those cracks, something stepped forward. Not a legion, not a fleet, a fate. No one expected Admiral Quarren to win, not even Quarren. When the order came from Segmentum Command to hold the Void Corridor at all costs, he did not protest. He didn't bargain for reinforcements. He didn't ask how long he had to hold it. He knew what it meant. There was no fleet, no backup, no rescue. They had sent him not to defend Cadia, but to slow its death. His battle group, Fleet Cadia Primaris, was an irregular scrap of what once had been the Imperium's finest orbital defense grid. A dozen reliable cruisers, a half-shield of Lunar-class leftovers, and a scattered net of system defense boats barely held together by field repairs and faith. The Black Fleet was coming. The signal was clear, 12 void points of emergent grav distortion, flicker warp readings across the entire grid. Blackstone's signature confirmed. Quarren watched the Auspex go dark. He removed his gloves. He told the Vox officer to page every ship in the line. And he said just 3 words. Brace for extinction. The first to fall were the Mars-pattern escort ships. Screaming into the breach, they never had time to deploy flak clouds. The Black Fleet moved like liquid void, silent, immediate, absolute. The lead elements of the enemy armada, massed Iron Warriors warships, Sons of Horus remnants, Word-bearer carriers, demon-bent cruisers, all blotted out the starlight. The final vigil went nova. The Lumen Prophet vanished mid-transmission. The Hasta's path detonated from within before it was even fired upon. And still, Quarren gave the order, hold position, not because they had a chance, but because Cadia needed 10 more minutes. Those minutes cost thousands of lives. In orbit, Imperial tech adepts screamed as their cogitator arrays overloaded from psychic bleed. Vox links melted from the sheer volume of astropathic collapse. Hymns played backwards through Lord Hailers before exploding in bursts of machine-warped static. This wasn't war. This was atmospheric collapse on a spiritual level. Void space howled. Below, on Cadia's surface, people heard none of it. The victories still echoed. The celebrations continued. But the stars looked wrong. The constellations that had marked navigation for generations had shifted. Celestial landmarks had disappeared. Astrologians reported impossible movements. The Eye of Terror was not where it had been. It was closer. The Black Fleet wasn't breaking through. It was already inside. On board the Blessed Reproach, the last reliable macro battleship under Quarren's direct command, damage reports piled like bodies. Servitor decks were venting. Astropathic chambers had gone silent. The Geller field was fluctuating. And still they fired. Broadside after broadside, torpedo run after torpedo run, ships that had served in 10 crusades emptied their magazines knowing it wouldn't be enough. Lieutenant Halbrin, barely 23 and already commanding 3 squadrons, took a melter blast to the chest when the gun deck overloaded. He died giving the order to continue barrage cycle. 3 seconds later, the entire prow of his ship was gone. The Blackstone fortress entered real space without ceremony. It simply appeared. It displaced 6 Imperial cruisers by overlapping with them. Their atoms were split. Their hulls folded in reverse. Their deaths were instantaneous. But death wasn't the point. The Blackstone didn't fire. It just existed. And that was enough. Reality began to bend. The warp grew thicker. Vox traffic slowed, distorted, and then became impossible. Even in high-command vessels, auger screens bled colors that didn't exist. Sanity was no longer mandatory, just a liability. Quarren understood finally what the battle really was. This wasn't an invasion. This was a ritual. The pylons, the ancient Necron structures buried across Cadia, were reacting. Not to enemy fire, but to something else. Each death above the planet wasn't a strategic loss. It was a symbol, a price. A blood tithe to weaken something old and buried. He activated fallback protocol X Omicron. Not to retreat, but to scatter the last of the fleet. To extend the time it would take to kill them all. For 17 more minutes, the sky of Cadia remained a blood-lit dome of war. Those 17 minutes were enough. Enough for Celestine to complete her return orbit. Enough for the remaining Kasrkin regiments to relocate. Enough for Creed to revise his battlefield contingencies and cancel the handover of command. 17 minutes, and the entire orbital fleet died for it. Admiral Quarren did not leave his bridge. He did not give a final speech. He did not pray. He simply watched the Blackstone fortress complete its phase shift, and he whispered, "So that's what you are." Then the bridge fell away, and the Admiral fell with it. Back on Cadia, the sky turned red. Not from fire, but from absence. There was nothing left above them but wreckage, and a shape in the void that did not move, did not rotate, did not emit light. The Blackstone fortress hovered in silence. It had no crew, no bridge, no face, and yet it stared, down at Cadia, down at its pylons, down at its heart. Like it knew, he didn't arrive at the head of the fleet. He didn't need to. Abaddon the Despoiler entered the Cadian system at the exact moment the last fragments of the Blessed Reproach dissolved in orbital flame, His flagship, the vengeful spirit, once the pride of Horus, once the hammer that broke the Emperor's palace shields, breached real space like a blade falling into water. No warp storm, no fanfare, no communications, just presence, and with it came the collapse of the lie. The Imperium had called this the 13th Black Crusade. They had labelled it, logged it, archived it like the 12 before. A pattern, a cycle, another wound that would heal. But this one didn't come to wound. It came to end. Abaddon did not speak. He had no broadcast, no decree. He had already spoken, through centuries of deliberate failure. 12 crusades, each one a lesson, each one a probe, each one peeling layers of the Imperium away like armor plates. He had never cared about winning those wars. He had only ever wanted the Imperium to believe it was safe. Now, with their guard down, their commanders fractured, their belief systems misaligned and tangled in faith, bureaucracy, and misplaced pride, he struck. But not like a warlord, like a conductor. From the vengeful spirit, no orders were shouted. There was no vox traffic. The Black Fleet already knew what to do. They had been prepared for this moment for centuries. Each ship in Abaddon's fleet had held its fire until the Admiral's flagship arrived. They had let Cadia see them first, let them believe the worst had already happened. And then the real assault began. Planetfall was not immediate. Abaddon didn't want conquest. He wanted time. He wanted the Blackstone. He wanted the pylons to break in sequence. He knew Cadia could not stop him, but Cadia could interfere. So first, the orbit. Next, the ritual. Then, and only then, would he descend. Inside the vengeful spirit, the despoiler stood before a projection of the Eye of Terror. It pulsed, expanded, reacted. He reached out with a hand twice remade by demoncraft and something older, and the eye responded. It wasn't just open, it was listening. The great rift was forming. The moment had to be perfect. In the throne chamber behind him, Dravura Morkath, his lieutenant, watched as a demonic servitor played back images from Solemnace. The bell had rung, 13 times. The blood was still fresh in the galleries. Trazyn had sealed his vaults. The conditions were met. Elsewhere in the fleet, word-bearer chaplains completed their verses. Sorcerers on captured Imperial ships inverted Geller fields one by one. In the Blackstone fortress, no one gave the activation command, because no one was aboard. It moved of its own will, guided by scripts written in impossible logic long before mankind had language. Everything was aligned. Back on Cadia, Creed felt it. He didn't have Auspec's data. He didn't need it. He felt the weight, the way the Vox static changed pitch, the way shadows stopped following the sun, the way prayers stopped working. Celestine tried to fly again. She collapsed mid-air. The command to refortify the orbital guns came too late. Only a quarter had survived the initial bombardment. The rest were either sabotaged, misplaced in the new command structure, or buried in bureaucracy. The military diet was silent now. The celebration was over. No more parades, no more hymns, only war. Sergeant Kell stood on the balcony of Command Casa and watched the sky. It wasn't night, it wasn't day, it was just wrong. Colours that didn't belong. Clouds moving against the wind. Light sources that had no origin. And in the centre, a black shape. Motionless, ominous, watching them all. Tithes were recalculated. Deployment orders reversed. The 47th Mechanized was rerouted. The 112th Kassakin dropped into trenches they'd never trained for. The 89th Combat-Picked Recon issued live fire orders again, less than a week after being stood down. The new war was beginning. And Cadia was already behind. Abaddon still had not spoken. He stood aboard his ship like a god sculpting fate. He watched Cadia burn, but did not react. He observed the flicker of Imperial resistance and did not move. This wasn't emotion. This was orchestration, every move timed, every blow sequenced. Because Abaddon knew the truth, Cadia wasn't an enemy. It was a keystone, a linchpin in the oldest design. The Eye had watched, the Warp had planned, and Abaddon had learned. It was never about breaking Cadia's will. It was about breaking its function. It held the pylons. It stabilized the eye. It choked the demons. It denied the warp, until now. The vengeful spirit rotated, its weapons locked on nothing, because it was not here to fire. It was here to witness. There was no warning, no muzzle flare, no plasma signature, no lock-on. The Blackstone fortress simply turned, not physically, conceptually. Every augur screamed. Every astropath aboard Cadia's surviving orbiters collapsed. Entire cogitator networks fried before they could log the telemetry. One moment, the structure hung dormant in the void, silent, inert, impossibly massive. The next, it acknowledged something. And that was enough to begin the betrayal. The Blackstone fortress had always been a mystery. Necron forged, ancient beyond measurement, designed to defy chaos, to stabilize real space, to interrupt warp phenomena through geometric nullification fields. They were not ships, they were seals. Built during the war in heaven, long before the birth of the Imperium, long before the Emperor walked terror, the Blackstone constructs were never meant to be used, only maintained. But the one now hovering over Cadia had been stolen, corrupted, repurposed, claimed by the despoiler, tethered to rituals long forgotten, and bound to a function far more dangerous than any firing pattern. This wasn't a fortress anymore, it was a key. At 1347 local standard time, the Blackstone fortress activated. Its impact wasn't felt, it was understood. Every pylon on Cadia flared. The earth beneath the chasers vibrated not like tectonic movement, but like suppressed memory trying to erupt through stone. In Casa Galen, servitors building a new shrine to the Emperor convulsed, tearing themselves apart in sync with invisible pulses. In Casa Basteron, the chapel of the gatekeeper cracked down its center, its stained plasteel windows melting into vox static. In the outer provinces, lakes boiled into clouds without temperature increase. Ferrocrete towers slumped sideways like dying flora. Everywhere the same phenomenon, resonant destabilization. The Blackstone fortress had begun unbinding the planet. Beneath Cadia's crust, buried in tombs even the Mechanicus feared to touch, the pylons groaned. They had been dormant for millennia, wired into the very bedrock, aligned with fault lines that weren't tectonic, but gravitational. Each one channeling null waves into the void, hemming the Eye of Terror back into its unnatural cage. And now, they began to fall, one by one. Sequence locked, perfectly timed. This wasn't brute force, this was precision betrayal. On Mars, deep within the noosphere, an emergency protocol triggered. Red boxes blinked open in forgotten archives. Forbidden records from the Horus Heresy began decrypting themselves. Warnings penned by the first magi of the Sigillites' design bureaus were pulled from backup data looms. The verdict was clear. Blackstone inversion event. Project designation, Omega Null. Status, uncontainable. System loss, inevitable. By the time Mars tried to send the message to Cadia, the warp swallowed the signal whole. Back on the surface, Creed stood in the command sanctum of Casa Kraf, watching the hololith glitch. A perfect simulation of the planet's stability network, provided by Magos Drescher weeks earlier, now flickered with cascading failure nodes. Every point of structural reinforcement, gone. Every projection of stability, collapsed. Every pylon node, offline or corrupt. The despoiler hadn't come to capture Cadia. He had come to erase its role in reality. Trazyn watched it unfold from deep within his galleries. Through his scry field, an impossible lattice of trans-temporal analysis nodes, vision stone mirrors, and phase-tuned pict recorders, he watched the Blackstone betray its nature. This wasn't just activation. This was inversion. What had once nullified the warp now summoned it. Trazyn whispered to himself, not in panic, but with a kind of historical despair. They've inverted the geometry. The Blackstone was no longer suppressing the eye. It was feeding it. Aboard the vengeful spirit, Abaddon finally moved. Not toward the command throne, not toward the helm, but toward the viewing chamber. He wanted to watch the moment. The exact second Cadia ceased to matter. His inner circle remained silent. Even the demons tethered to his will hissed low and curled away. They could feel it too. The inversion, the treason, the undoing of everything the pylons had once held back. In orbit, the sky turned solid black, not from darkness, but from color collapse, where the warp and real space began to blur, where visible spectra no longer obeyed laws of reflection or source. Ships lost guidance, Vox relays failed, pilots clawed at their own eyes as the stars rearranged themselves mid-flight. Down on Cadia, people began to hallucinate things that weren't there. And worse, things that were. The Blackstone had opened a breach, not into the eye, but through Cadia itself. In the wastes beyond Casa Parthex, 1,000 square kilometers of land simply lifted. Gravity reversed, folded, inverted. Out of that rupture poured demons, not in waves, not in swarms, but one at a time. Selected, measured, deliberate, each a punctuation mark in the sentence Abaddon was carving into real space. This was not a siege. It was an execution. On the other side of the planet, in the deepest vaults of Mechanicus Command, Magos Dominus Dryvar initiated final denial protocols. His last transmission to the surface was brief. Blackstone corrupted, pylons reversed, Cadia no longer sustainable, recommend planetary evacuation or ritual sterilization, Ave Imperator. Then silence. Creed knew what came next. Not just the orbital collapse, not just the fortress cracks, not just the ground giving out beneath the casas, but the faith, the idea of Cadia, what it had meant for 10,000 years, that it stood, that idea was breaking. And once that happened, there was nothing left to defend. The Cadian High Command was never built for emergency consensus. It was built to last, and when permanence breaks, what remains is not structure. It's panic, disguised as protocol. In the central assembly spire of Casa Kraf, the Diet convened as if the world outside wasn't falling in slow, deliberate increments. Vox relays jittered. Holoscreens failed to stabilize. Half the picked feeds showed static, the others showed fire. They still took roll call, they still opened with prayer, they still addressed the Lord Castellan as a temporary seat holder. Not as the man who'd held Cadia's line since before half the council had been born. Creed didn't sit, he didn't blink, he listened. And he knew in that moment, Cadia would not survive its own leadership. Zabine opened first. Supreme Commissar, hardline moralist, now armed with righteous panic. The fortress world cannot be allowed to fail. Morale must not collapse. We must project order, reinforce the outer casas, re-establish control of the Vox, restore normalcy. She did not say retreat. She would not even entertain collapse. Even as the sky went black outside the chamber window, even as the ground shook, even as the Blackstone shadow stretched across the picked screen like a guillotine. Reich followed, Logistar General, a man whose mind was bound to the flow of logistics and credits. He proposed a complete evacuation of all non-combatants from central command zones, a redirection of all supply lines from internal defense to border region sacrificial delays. His words were precise, meaningless, numbers recited to a god of dead currency. Creed stared at both of them and said nothing. They were afraid, that was clear. But it wasn't fear of the despoiler, not of the warp, not of the Blackstone. They were afraid of losing control. The structure was collapsing, and they still wanted to govern it. Below the spire, civilian shelters had already begun to overflow. The first cracks in the Casa underlayers had ruptured the transit tunnels. Whole districts were now unreachable except by airlift. Vox silence wasn't just jamming, it was death. No signals came from Casa Basteron anymore. The picked feeds had turned red, then gone black. Still, the Diet voted. Still, Zabine clutched to her rank like a relic. Still, they imagined they could manage this. Creed lit another IHO stick. He turned to Sergeant Kell. "How long since contact with the outer ring?" 72 minutes, Kell replied. Creed nodded. He didn't need to say it. 72 minutes is the gap between holding the line and being surrounded. tensions in the chamber fractured further when Margos Drevar's last transmission was decrypted. Planetary integrity compromised. Blackstone manipulation irreversible. Cadia no longer sustainable. Zabin declared the message heretical. Rake tried to suppress it under classified status. Creed told the room it didn't matter anymore. Then the shouting began. Some argued for withdrawal to the orbital spires. Others demanded the activation of Exterminatus-class measures. One junior commander invoked the Astra Militarum's Article Null, demanding a vote of no confidence in all command structures not housed within Segmentum proper. They had become children in a collapsing hab block. And above it all, the despoiler watched. Not through pict feeds, not through orbitals, but through effect. Every second, they argued, was another second the Blackstone recalibrated. In the halls outside the chamber, guards from opposing regiments stared each other down across barricades. Kassakin loyal to Creed held the inner perimeter. Shock troopers under Zabin's purview manned the outer gates. The divide wasn't ideological, it was procedural. Creed stood for command under fire. Zabin stood for structure under God. Rake stood for nothing but continuity. And no one stood for Cadia. The Diet splintered formally within the hour. Half-declared martial revision protocols, stripping Creed of control, though none had the power to enforce it. The others followed Creed's authority out of necessity, not respect. A third faction simply left. Deserters with rank, fleeing toward Casa Parthex's launch fields, unaware they no longer existed. Celestine appeared on the steps of the command sanctum during the second vote. She bled light from her shoulder. Her hair was dusted with void ash. She did not speak. She stood, and every soldier in the courtyard stood with her. Inside, Creed watched as his command broke apart. Not in fire, not in war, but in process. The last vote failed to pass. No quorum, no consensus. The Diet adjourned itself mid-broadcast. By then, half of Cadia was already gone. Before the planet shattered, it bled. Not in ruptures or quakes, not in flashes of demonic annihilation, but in logistics. Every Casa that still had power received the same order: hold. No reinforcements were promised. No evac schedules issued. Just a single line on a flickering screen. You are now a line position. Maintain contact as long as possible. It wasn't an order to win. It was a sentence to delay. Casa Dera was the first to go. It didn't fall to invasion. It collapsed. One moment it stood, battered but operational. The next, a localized grav rupture swallowed the entire structure. The Casa fell into a sinkhole that had not existed the day before. 3 regiments died in less than 12 seconds. None of them screamed. The Vox links cut mid-report. The final log from Dera was 4 syllables. Skies turning red. Casa Vortan died by fire. The fuel silos detonated after a glancing hit from a drifting macro shell, one that had been knocked off course in orbit by the warp flux surrounding the Blackstone. The resulting firestorm spread across 12 districts. And still, the White Shields fought. Gangers, off-world conscripts, troopers too young to shave, holding ferrocrete alleyways as flame rained down from both sides. Not one of them retreated. Not one of them was recovered. The story repeated across every hemisphere. Casa Devik, collapse from below. Casa Heron, atmospheric rupture. Casa Basteron, unknown cause. Last recorded signal was a child's voice singing Cadian Steel. These weren't battles. They were attritions of existence. The warp pressure from the Blackstone was unmaking space. The laws of matter, of weight, of friction, of heat began to warp. In some places, time dilated. Guardsmen aged years inside shelters they had entered minutes ago. In others, Vox signals arrived before the voices that spoke them. And through it all, the orders remained unchanged. Hold. Sergeant Lerner of the 112th Kassakin Regiment led her squad into a hab block overtaken by cultists. Not enemies, not traitor guardsmen, just civilians who had finally gone mad. They wore their skin inside out. They knelt to invisible lights. They clawed at their own eyes to let the warp see. She didn't hesitate. She purged the block, sealed the doors, marked the hab as clear. Then she ordered the Vox to say nothing about what they'd seen. Let them think we're still winning. Major Helska, holding a broken supply corridor with 7 survivors and a stim-shocked Medicae, detonated her own munitions cache to stall a demonic advance for 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough for an entire platoon to get behind cover. She did not survive. Her name was not recorded. Cadian command protocols began assigning codenames to the dead based on function, not identity. Unit 47 Vox Delta, silenced. Unit 12, Purgation Sigma, exhausted. Unit 31-Fortify-Echo, dissolved. They had become currency, bartered for moments. In the upper spires of Command Casa, Creed recalculated front lines every 11 minutes. Not to reposition troops, but to determine how much longer the illusion of planetary defense could be upheld. He knew the pylons were going. He knew the eye was opening. He knew the Blackstone was pulsing like a second heart in orbit. He didn't need a map. He needed time. Kel handled the communications, what was left of them. He listened to final requests. He rerouted fire missions. He comforted a White Shield girl as she bled out and asked if her squad had survived. He told her they had. They hadn't. He logged her death and marked her squad Unit Null 5. They were gone before reinforcements could even leave the pad. Celestine reappeared in Casa Myrak at dawn. She had no escort, no transport. She walked through the ruins in silence, carrying a wounded Kasserkin on her back. She handed him to the first Medicae she saw. She said nothing. Then she raised her sword, and the fire began again. The surviving Sisters of Battle in Casa Lawn enacted the rite of last ember. They lit the shrine from within, sang until the roof caved in, held the line against 300 heretics armed with stolen flamers. No sister fell while standing. When the shrine collapsed, it took all of them with it. The heretics tried to cheer. Then the shrine detonated, vaporizing the entire block. These weren't victories. They were offerings. Cadia didn't ask for them. It simply absorbed them. Like a planet that had grown used to sacrifice, like a fortress that had forgotten peace. The tithes continued. 100 kilometers west of the central command sanctum, Casa Bronwyn's Children's Hospital lost power. The Medici tried to convert the lumen reserves to life support, tried to vent atmosphere from adjacent habs to provide pressure stabilization, tried to hold the infants against their chests to keep their hearts beating manually. It didn't work. None of it worked. In Casa Kraf, a trooper who hadn't slept in 4 days finally broke. He stood in the chow line, looked up at the red sky, took off his helmet, and smiled. He began to sing, not in fear, not in despair, just softly, calmly. He sang Cadian Steel, he sang it perfectly. And then his heart stopped. There was no wound, no weapon, just stop, like something had collected its due. Creed watched the casualty projections plateau, not because the dying slowed, but because the data cores could no longer calculate at planetary scale. The machine spirit of the central cogitator simply burned out. Kel offered to recalibrate it. Creed told him not to. No one needs to know the exact number, he said. Outside, the Cassas continued to die, and Cadia kept buying time, one body at a time. There were only 2 entities on Solemnace when the bell rang. Trazyn the Infinite and Sanet, his cryptech attendant. But when the bell completed its 13th toll, every exhibit in the prismatic galleries, every chronostasis field, every suspended moment of war, every curated atrocity woke up. Not by movement, not by voice, by resonance. The Infinite did not panic. He had not panicked when the Silent King exiled him. He had not panicked when the Tyranids cracked his outpost on Orthos. He had not panicked when one of his clones tried to overwrite his neural lattice from within the conflagration vault. But this time, he paused. Because for the first time in 10,000 years, history was no longer predictable. He watched through an armature of phase-synced lenses, each one tuned to a separate plane of chronology. In one, Cadia as it had been 2 centuries prior, firm, proud, gleaming in the dusk light of Segmentum Obscurus. In another, Cadia now, a wounded sphere of flame, rupture, and ritual inversion. And in a third, Cadia, as it had not yet become, a ghost planet, fractured and orbiting nothing, its core cooled, its name hollow. They overlapped, and the bleed between them was growing. Sanet asked in binary clicks if the galleries needed to be sealed. Trazyn didn't respond. He walked. Past frozen Kasrakin battalions from the siege of Valthrus. Past a perfectly preserved Cetan shard encased in stasis glass that screamed only when ignored. Past a copy of the Magna Mater, printed in blood on Xenos hide. And finally, into the Crucible Vault, the one place even he did not linger. There in the center of the room hung the Creed Simulacrum, a perfect recreation. Biological, emotional, behavioral. Scanned during the 12th Crusade without the subject's knowledge. Preserved at the moment of mental inflection. The split second when strategy overtook fear. Trazyn studied it. The simulacrum did not move, but its expression had changed. "Why do you still fascinate me?" the Necron asked aloud, his voice like a dead sun cracking. The simulacrum's eyes glinted, and for a moment, it almost answered. Outside the vault, alarms cascaded across the tomb world. Not for breach, not for decay, for context loss. History itself was breaking. In the Garden of Broken Symbols, where the Infinite kept artifacts that had no documented origin, entire shelves collapsed. Objects recategorized themselves without external input. Chrono stamps inverted. Wars that had not yet happened began to appear in the archives. Trazyn's curio of fallen heroes updated autonomously. One name flickered into view. Ursakar E. Creed. Status: Mythic Ascension pending. Trazyn closed the panel manually. He did not allow automation in legacy matters. Not anymore. The war was no longer a war, it was a correction. Something older than memory had twisted the course of time itself. Cadia was not just falling, it was being rewritten, across cultures, across epochs, across species. Even the Necron data lattices were showing signs of narrative entropy. Stories were shifting, chronologies compressing, cause and effect breaking into effect, then cause. In the sanctum of forgotten crusades, a stasis loop showing a white shield holding a breach for 19 seconds before being immolated began to repeat erratically. Not in sequence, in intent. Sometimes he lived, sometimes he ran. Sometimes he became a Kasrakin. Each version flickered for seconds before resetting. Reality wasn't eroding, it was editing. Sanet warned of cognitive drift in the noosphere. The bell's impact had gone deeper than space-time. It had reached into the meaning of history. Cadia was not just becoming a martyr world, it was becoming an anchor point. Every culture that had fought there began to shift how they remembered it. Even species not present began to fabricate interactions. Eldar libraries registered losses they never incurred. Tyrannid hive memories absorbed tactical data they had not harvested. Something about Cadia's fall echoed backward. It wasn't a moment, it was a myth blooming in real time. Trazyn stood before the gallery of Imperial last stands. 52 scenes, 52 worlds, 52 moments of impossible defiance. And now, a 53rd slot had appeared. No record inserted it, no servant carved it, no order authorized it. But there it was, a pedestal, a frozen moment. Creed. Standing over a tactical array, Kell at his side, a burning casa in the distance, and the words, "He bought them time." The Necron tilted his head. He could feel something watching. Not a god, not a demon. Something deeper, something in the syntax of causality itself. It wasn't that Cadia mattered. It was that Cadia would always matter, because the story was now anchored in the bones of time. And that was beyond even the Necrons. Trazyn returned to his central archive. He keyed in his private record. The fall of Cadia is no longer a collapse. It is a creation. The moment is recursive. Its echoes are louder than its origin. Even the stars are starting to remember differently. I will not interfere. I will only preserve. But I do not think the galaxy will survive what Cadia just became. He closed the entry and walked back to the Creed simulacrum. It was smiling now. The ecclesiarchy calls it the Vault of the Living Dead, not because it houses corpses, but because everything inside is still breathing. At least, for now. Beneath the shrine of St. Maurican, 4 levels below the sacred ossuary, and 6 beneath the public sanctum, is the Imperium's last spiritual triage. Wounded troopers, civilians pulled from burning casas, sisters of battle on their final breath, sororitas, preachers who have seen the veil and refuse to cross it. They are not healed here. They are transfigured. The Adepta Sororitas call it the second vigil. The name doesn't come from scripture. It comes from fire. The moment a sister can no longer rise to fight, she is placed in the vault, clothed in the white robes of second vigil, and sung to sleep, until the Emperor decides her flame is needed once more. That moment rarely comes, but the belief does not waver. Sister Superior Rix halts at the threshold every cycle. She kneels, prays, and then walks the central corridor. She doesn't check vitals. She doesn't administer stim. She only speaks, 1 sentence per patient. No more, no less. You still stand because he still watches. Some weep, some scream. Some do not respond at all. None of them are forgotten. Above the vault, in the remainders of the shrine's sanctuary, the ecclesiarchal guard prepares for the final mass. Not the last ever, no one will say that, but the last before everything changes. High Confessor Dolomedes writes his sermon directly onto the cracked marble of the pulpit floor. He's out of parchment, out of ink, out of time. His words are erratic, uneven, but 1 sentence repeats, carved deeper than the rest. Faith survives planets. In the upper shrine tower, choir boys with missing limbs sing the litany of perseverance through broken vox amplifiers. Their voices stutter. The sound cracks. But it carries, echoing across the craters of what used to be the Garden of St. Barrion. An orbital shell turned that garden into a crater 4 days ago. But they still sing. The civilians beneath the shrine have stopped praying for rescue. They've started praying for purpose. In the corners, old men draw the aquila onto their chests in blood. Children recite the names of saints no longer recognized. A blind woman claims she saw Celestine pass through the flame unburned, and others swear they saw it too, though no such thing happened. It doesn't matter. The stories are becoming real faster than anyone can disprove them. Across the hive-fractured zones of eastern Casa Kraf, missionaries begin speaking of living relics. The wounded who do not die, the orphans who cannot be burned, the guardsmen whose lace guns never overheat. None of it is confirmed, all of it is believed. An old Cadian priest named Verlo begins preaching to the ruined streets with a bolt shell lodged in his ribcage. He has not eaten in days. He should be dead. But his voice carries farther than any voxcaster, and his sermons make hardened Kasrkin pause mid-firing line. He speaks only 3 lines. We are not dying, we are being carved, and we are not yet finished. In Casa Dera's ruins, a picked recording of a Medici holding her patient's hand as they die has gone viral across low-grade Vox. The image blurs with time, becomes abstract, then iconographic. Soon it shows up in shrines, then in skin etchings, then in dreams. Her name is unknown, but she becomes a saint within days. Saint Sarah of the Final Touch. The ecclesiarchy did not sanction it. They couldn't have. They were no longer in control. The myth of Cadia begins forming before the war even ends. In the minds of those who will not live to see the conclusion. In the breath of those who keep reciting litanies long after the words lose meaning. In the silence that forms when a prayer is answered not by victory, but by memory. Cadia is not becoming sacred. It already was. They just didn't know it until now. In the vault of the living dead, the temperature drops. Sister Rick senses it before the sensors register. One by one, the wounded begin to hum. They do not know the melody. They do not know each other. But the sound rises, unbroken, harmonized. It is the chant of the gate, an ancient pre-imperial Cadian march, preserved only in fragment. No one remembers teaching it, but they all know it. Outside, a casa collapses, and no one in the vault reacts. Because in that moment, they are all part of something else. Not survival, not faith, not denial, something deeper, a feeling that Cadia is not dying, it is becoming. The room was quiet when the last Vox died. No alarms, no flickering red light, no final burst of static. Just absence, the kind of silence that doesn't wait for noise to return. The kind of silence that means you're the last one left. Creed had held command posts under siege. He had outmaneuvered demons, heretics, and highborn fools with too many medals. He had led campaigns across snow, hive, void, ash, and mud. But he had never been alone. Not like this. Not with Kel gone. Not with the council disbanded. Not with Vox silence stretching out like a second sky across every console. He lit another IHO stick, not because he needed one, because he had nothing left to say. The command chamber smelled like old oil and scorched insulation. Power converters still hummed. Maps still blinked. The war still looked like it was happening. But Creed knew better. The war was over. The dying wasn't. But the war had ended the moment the Diet turned on itself, when the pylons cracked, when the Blackstone fortress began pulsing like a second heart in orbit. Now, all that was left was timing. He didn't sit. He didn't pace. He stood in front of the hololith and watched projections shift in real time. They no longer made sense. Cassas listed as destroyed 3 hours ago were now shown active. Zones marked stable showed loss of signal timestamps that hadn't occurred yet. The war map had become a ritual hallucination, a thing that looked like command, but wasn't. Even the cogitator knew better. Its logic core had quietly switched to passive record mode. No decisions, no analysis, just archive. A digital shrug. Even the machine spirit had given up. Creed reached out, touched the center of the map, watched it ripple under his fingers. "Kel," he said aloud. No one answered. There was no death report, no official confirmation, just nothing. Kel had walked into the chaos of the Cadia with his Vox set to standby. And he never came back. There was no drama, no sacrifice speech, no final message, just an empty channel. And a silence Creed refused to replace. He replayed a memory. Kel, listing unit readiness reports with perfect intonation. Kel, standing beside him in the rain after Dera fell. Kel, finishing his sentence when Creed didn't need to speak. Creed never told him how much that mattered. Now he'd never get the chance. He looked down at the tactical array, flashed through troop readouts, saw nothing but zeros. Then flipped to old battle records, ones stored during the 11th Crusade. He watched Kazakin breach a tunnel system with synchronized precision. Watched orbital footage of Valkyrie squadrons blanketing enemy armor in a rolling line of Prometheum flame. He watched victories no one remembered anymore, and then he turned the screen off. At the far end of the room, something sparked. A pick slab. Old. Damaged. Part of the shrine inset built into the command sanctum wall. It showed an image of Cadia from orbit. Perfect sphere. Green-blue. Clean atmosphere. A relic. Before the first shell fell. Before the first Casa cracked. Before the pylons screamed, Creed stood in front of it, studied it like a battlefield, and whispered, "You never stood, you held." He walked back to the center of the chamber, looked out across the fractured command hololith, and reached into his coat. The relic was small, metal, unmarked. No cogitator data tracked it. No Mechanicus scanner had ever mapped it. Because it wasn't from now. It was from Trazyn. A gift, or a joke, delivered through impossible means, wrapped in meaning Creed could never fully understand. He didn't activate it. He didn't even know how. He just placed it on the table and stepped back. Nothing happened for 60 seconds. Then it lit. Soft glow, low hum. A vibration that did not belong in real space. It projected nothing, announced nothing. But Creed could feel it. A recording function. A thing not meant to speak, but to remember. He faced it, cleared his throat, and said the only words that still had weight. We held. We were outgunned, outmaneuvered, outplayed. And we held. Outside, another Casa fell. The light dimmed. The sky cracked. Creed didn't turn to look. He just took a breath and spoke into history. The tectonic shift wasn't seismic. It was psychic. A ripple through belief. A pressure wave through matter. A silence so deep it inverted itself into sound. And then Cadia broke. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Not through attrition or ritual failure. It split. The Blackstone fortress completed its cycle. It hadn't fired a single shot. It had done something worse. It had tuned the pylons, resonated them, inverted their frequencies, unwound their function. What once caged the Eye of Terror now pulled it open. The Great Rift didn't appear. It tore through, and the world paid the price. Casa Craft was the first to register the breach. Vox reports stuttered with environmental anomalies, grav variance at +0, civ. Core pressure spike, plate rotation, repeating. Stars out of alignment. Then the horizon cracked. Not visually, literally. The sky fractured. To the east, at the edge of the Mare Orpheus, mountains folded in on themselves like wet parchment. Valleys became peaks. Sea lines lifted vertically, flung into low orbit before crashing back down as molten rain. Entire topographies rewrote themselves without geological process. Cadia was editing itself. In Casa Mirac, Celestine stood atop a shattered Aquila spire, sword pointed to the storm above. Her wings burned. Her eyes poured light. She sang, not in words, but in pulses of golden fire that tore demons from the air before they could form. Even so, it wasn't enough. To the west, Casa Parthex disappeared. Not destroyed, removed. A clean surgical absence where a city once stood. Every building gone, every road erased. Only heat signatures, drifting upward like ghosts. Creed watched it all from the command sanctum. The map didn't fail. It surrendered. No more updates, no more simulations, just a flat plane of static across every coordinate. He leaned on the table, breathed through his teeth, and whispered, "It started." The orbitals failed. Not the ships, they were already gone. The orbit itself, the planetary alignment, the magnetosphere, collapsed. Cadian moons shifted their rotation. One was torn into a debris field. The others bled aurorae across the sky in unnatural colors, green-black, blood-red, ultraviolet. Then gravity staggered. For 3 seconds, everything lifted. Cassers, people, debris, all rose into the air in perfect silence. No wind, no motion, just ascent. Then violently it all fell. Some came down intact, most did not. The deaths were uncountable. The scale, unthinkable. But the moment was precise. That was when Cadia broke. Below the surface, the pylons screamed. Not audibly, through force. Each collapsed into itself. Warp energy spiked outward. A wavefront of null space erupted like an anti-explosion, pulling rather than pushing. Reality folded around the planet's core. The crust separated from the mantle. The plates shattered. Not a crack, a shear. Cadia lost its integrity in every dimension. Physical, gravitational, conceptual. A world no longer supported by its own meaning. Celestine fell from the sky, burning, screaming. Not in defeat, in fury. She hit the ground hard enough to crater the basilica beneath her, and still she stood. But even she knew. This was not a war anymore. This was a verdict. In the ruins of Casa Dera, a squad of Kasserkin linked arms and stood in a circle. They did not pray, they did not run. They activated their charges, looked up, and whispered, "Cadia stands." Then they exploded. All over the surface, final acts played out. Sisters holding walls with melted bolters. Children being handed flak armor 2 sizes too large. Commissars weeping over shattered rebreathers, unable to find a reason to order one more death. And the sky continued to fall. In orbit, the debris of the Cadian moons formed a ring. Briefly, a mockery of stability, a belt of failure. Then the Blackstone pulsed again, and the ring scattered into entropy. Abaddon watched. From his throne aboard the vengeful spirit, eyes locked onto the rift below. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply waited. Because the gate wasn't open yet. Not fully. That came next. There is no moment, no sound, no flash of light. When the Cadian gate breaks, it does not announce itself. It unravels. The warp doesn't pour through. It reverses. Space peels back like old parchment. Lines of causality collapse inward. Galactic navigation maps blink out in perfect synchrony. Systems once held apart by light years fall into alignment without motion. And in the center of it all, Cadia becomes zero. The anchor, the pivot, the origin of the wound. This isn't a storm, it's a cleft in existence. The cicatrix maledictum opens without form, not a portal, not a vortex, a rift, longer than sectors, wider than segmentums, a scar across the stars. From the Eye of Terror, slicing across the galactic plane, through the Astronomicon, bisecting real space and disintegrating every tether that held the Imperium together. Entire subsectors are devoured in the first hour. Ships vanish in mid-translation. Warp routes collapse. Navigator houses begin mass suspension. Astropaths go blind or mad by the tens of thousands. In Ultramar, Guilliman feels it before reports arrive. On Mars, the noosphere trembles. In Terra's spires, the Golden Throne pulses with unnatural rhythm. The breach is everywhere. But it starts here, on Cadia. The pylons collapse one by one. Not in detonation, in surrender. Their null geometry loses cohesion. Their anti-warp lattice folds into its own paradox. The power they once bled into the Eye of Terror, gone. The gate no longer holds. The eye stretches outward, grows sentient, hungers. The warp doesn't flood real space, it becomes real space. On the surface, the sky no longer functions. Day and night flicker like strobe-lit memories. Stars reverse position. The moons disintegrate. And then, the eye sees through. Not metaphor, not abstraction. It sees. The face of Cadia is witnessed by something that does not understand scale, compassion, or physics. And in that moment, the Blackstone fortress completes its final role. It doesn't fire. It blinks out. When it reappears, it's inside Cadia's orbit. Inside its crust, inside its core. And the planet shatters. Not exploded. Broken. Like a machine stripped of its prime gear. The surface folds. The mantle shifts. The tectonics reverse. The crust splits into floating shelves, dragging chasms with them into the void. Cities fall upward. Forests drift sideways. Oceans burn and rain down as steam. And at the center of it all is silence. Not peace, not mercy. Finality, some still live, on rocky fragments of the planet's crust now caught in suborbital fall. In void-hardened shelters buried beneath casas that no longer exist. In orbit, aboard damaged Navy wrecks unable to retreat but still afloat. They see the rift form from inside it. They do not survive, but they understand. The Astronomicon dims. For the first time in 10,000 years, the psychic beacon of the Emperor falters. Not destroyed, just drowned. The rift bleeds like a pulse through the immaterium. Planets untouched by Cadia's fall feel the tremor. Psychers burst into flame on distant forge worlds. Warp storms erupt across civilized space like lesions on a dying body. The Imperium fractures in silence, not from war, from disconnection. Millions of planets lose contact with segmentum command. Entire subsectors are lost in the void. The lexicon of unity, gone. The idea of a single Imperium, dead. Cadia didn't fall. It took the galaxy with it. And yet, in the final debris field, in the silence between tectonic annihilation and orbital collapse, a signal escapes, not a distress call, not a victory cry, just coordinates, a location, a marker, and a name. This is Cadia. If you're hearing this, we held. If you're hearing this, you must hold next. Glory to the Emperor. He didn't die on screen. He didn't vanish with a speech. There was no farewell, no heroic charge, no martyrdom broadcast across the Imperium. Ursukar E. Creed simply disappeared. But what he left behind changed everything. The last time anyone saw him, He was standing in the command sanctum, surrounded by falling dust and vox static, staring into a flickering hololith that no longer reflected the world it mapped. He touched the console once, said nothing, then turned away from the war and walked into the dark. That was it. The vox logs ended there, but the story didn't. Trazyn was already waiting, not in person. He never appeared in person. He was there in presence, in sensor disruption, in flickers of light that bent too far around corners, in the metallic scent that filled sealed rooms despite life support protocols. The moment the Blackstone breached Cadia's core, the infinite moved. He did not flee solemnness. He did not prepare for war. He initiated Collection Protocol Vortan 7. He wanted a relic, and it wasn't technology. Creed was not aware of Trazyn at first. The relic device, small, angular, impossible to define, activated by proximity. One moment, Creed was adjusting his coat. The next, he stood in a room that didn't exist. A pocket dimension. No walls, no sky, just light and echoes. Trazyn spoke without voice. You don't have time to object. Creed didn't flinch, didn't demand explanation, didn't reach for his pistol. He just asked, will they remember? Trazyn paused. They will remember you. Creed nodded. Good enough. Then the light consumed him. Outside, the command sanctum collapsed. The last surviving pict feed showed the roof falling inward, the floor tearing open, a burst of energy arcing upward like a dying scream. But there was no body, no remains, no trace, only a residual warp echo that distorted time for 6 seconds. And then, nothing. Aboard Solemnness, deep within the prismatic vaults, a new stasis field came online. Not a weapon, not a machine, a man, preserved in perfect stasis. Mid-stride, coat fluttering, face calm, a hand reaching towards something unseen. Label Ursakar E-Creed, Castellan of Cadia, Strategic Epoch Anomaly, Acquisition Code, authorized under Temporal Clause. 9, justified under Finality Principle. Trazyn stared at the new exhibit for exactly 12 seconds, then he turned away. Why Creed? Not because of who he was, but because of what he represented. Trazyn did not collect heroes, he collected moments, and Creed's last act wasn't survival. It was defiance, refusing to die when death was the only option left, refusing to surrender, refusing to despair. Even in the end, especially in the end, he commanded, not troops, not victories, meaning. Within hours, myths spread. Creed had outmaneuvered death. Creed had disappeared into the warp to lead the Emperor's armies beyond time. Creed had become part of the Astronomicon itself. None of it was true. All of it was believed. The man became legend. The legend became doctrine. Even Guilliman, upon his return, would hear the name spoken not as a title, but as a warning. Creed stood when worlds fell. What's your excuse? Some whispered he might return. Others claimed he never left. That he walked alongside every guard regiment as a ghost in the trench. That his voice still echoed in vox static during hopeless charges. One regiment even claimed he appeared to them in a dream, cigar lit, shouting orders they couldn't remember, but still obeyed. Trazyn made no statement. He simply filed the moment under. Crucial fragments of the Age of Ending. And locked the exhibit. For now. When the Eye of Terror opened, it didn't release an army. It released a pressure. Something too vast to be called a force. Something too old to be classified as a weapon. Not measured in units, not deployed in formations, not bound by rules, it had no name, because names imply containment. And this was what containment had failed to stop. The rift wasn't a hole, it was presence. A curtain torn open between fact and madness. A boundary erased. Where demons once had to pierce through reality to enter, now they simply stepped across, as if the galaxy had given them a key it didn't know it carried. The first things through weren't warbands. They were expressions. Manifestations of hunger, wrath, lust, decay, pure concept cast into flesh. Creatures that didn't obey anatomy. They unfolded, arrived, screamed, and became. Some fought, most simply existed, and in doing so, warped everything around them. A single one drifted into orbit above the Mechanicus wreck yard. The entire site inverted itself into a spiral of shrieking binary and fell back into the planet's remains. The few remaining Magi didn't send warnings. They prayed to a machine god that had already been eclipsed. Across Segmentum Obscurus, systems fell dark. Astra Militarum battle fleets scattered. Inquisitors went to ground. Black ships burned. Shrines were emptied, some by choice, others by wrath. And the warp kept coming. Not fast, not loud, just inevitable. The Noctis Eterna began here. The blackness, a darkness that swallowed the Astronomicon. That muted the stars. That made warp travel impossible, then unavoidable, then untraceable. Entire planets were marooned without ever leaving orbit. Civilizations forgot they were part of an empire. Loyalty curdled into panic, belief fractured, and in some places, where the warp touched down just hard enough, apotheosis. They weren't just fighting demons, they were fighting ideas. New cults rose instantly, preaching that Cadia's fall was the Emperor's punishment. Others claimed the Emperor was dead, and Creed had taken his place. Some just stopped speaking altogether, muttering to shadows no one else could see. The warp didn't kill them, it recruited them. In the Gothic sector, a world called Mara 7 blinked out. Not destroyed, not burned, just forgotten. All records corrupted, memories of it gone. Even the void charts had a gap where the system used to be. Some say it never existed, others say it escaped. But the Imperium lost more than a planet that day. It lost certainty. The rift didn't just split the stars, it split meaning. What had once been a universe of hard rules, harsh but knowable, became a universe of unknowable half-truths. The warp didn't rewrite the galaxy, it revealed it, for what it had always been. And through it all, the Black Fleet vanished. The despoiler was gone, not dead, not defeated, just absent. Because Abaddon hadn't come to rule, he'd come to unleash. And now that the eye was open, his work was done. The Imperium scrambled, rerouted, recalibrated, regrouped, but it was like trying to reinforce a dam after the flood had passed. Astartes chapters launched crusades into nothing. The Inquisition declared 1,000 new heresies. The Adeptus Mechanicus rewrote dozens of theological axioms just to explain what their augurs now showed. None of it mattered, because Cadia was gone. The gate was open, and the storm had already arrived. What came through the gate was not an army, it was a truth. There is no front line now. There is no edge to the war. There is no map, only survival, and even that isn't promised. They crawled out of fire. They walked through the bones of cities that had no names left. They watched the world vanish beneath their feet. And they lived, but they did not return with gratitude. They did not carry reverence. They brought rage. The surviving Cadians did not form legions. They did not regroup into clean, administratively tracked battalions. They scattered, into cells, into warbands, into cults of memory. Some joined existing regiments, others refused integration. A few, those with too much grief and not enough flesh left, vanished entirely. But all of them carried the same thing, a memory that burned. It wasn't just that Cadia had fallen. It was how. How the Diet turned inward, how reinforcements never came, how orders contradicted, how the fleet was sacrificed before it was ready, how voices on the Vox lied until the Vox died, and above all, how the Imperium let it happen. The rage was not loud, not theatrical, not treasonous. It was clinical. They stopped speaking about the fall. They stopped singing the hymns. They began marking their flak armor with numbers, coordinates, casualty counts, timestamps, reminders, not for enemies, for themselves. In the years that followed, a pattern emerged. Wherever Cadian survivors were stationed, discipline tightened, efficiency spiked, requisition orders simplified. Vox traffic dropped. They didn't talk. They acted. Commanders praised their focus, praised their resilience, praised their refusal to break. But none of them understood what they were looking at. This wasn't recovery. This was a vendetta, with no target and no endpoint. Some officers tried to integrate them more formally. They failed. Cadians did not salute the same way, did not march the same way, did not pray the same way. They had seen the end of ritual and refused to fake it again. The ecclesiarchy sent envoys to tend the trauma. None returned. One was found dismembered, hands nailed to his own chest, each finger painted with the phrase, "Stand again." After that, they stopped sending envoys. In the void, aboard patrol vessels salvaged from Black Fleet wreckage, Cadian units began running suicide missions without authorization. They targeted warp breaches, cult nests, derelict battlefields. They operated in silence. They reported only success or extinction. Segmentum Command began calling them Echo Cadia. They never used the name. One High Lord called for their disbandment. He died in a reactor accident the following month. No evidence of sabotage was found. But a symbol was etched into the blast chamber wall. A broken casa, a single figure standing in front of it. No words. Those who tried to offer pity were met with silence. Those who offered respect were tolerated. Those who offered excuses were erased. No tribunal, no process, just disappearance. The Cadians did not seek comfort. They did not ask for understanding. They only asked one thing. Where were you? No one could answer. Not the Mechanicus, not the Navy, not the Inquisition, not the throne. And so the survivors stopped asking. They just remembered. In time, their influence spread. Not upward, never toward power, sideways, across regiments, across units, across time. Their mannerisms were copied, their silence adopted, their symbols stenciled on helmets by soldiers who had never been to Cadia but needed something real to believe in. It wasn't doctrine, it was contagion, and behind it all, an idea took root. Cadia did not die. Cadia was killed. Not by chaos, not by Abaddon. By everyone else, not betrayal, neglect. The slow rot of an empire too bloated to protect what mattered most. The fortress world that held for 10,000 years, abandoned in the moment that counted. The gate fell, the rift opened, and the rest of the galaxy woke up too late. The survivors remembered that, and they made sure no one else forgot. From the ruin came a signal. From the silence, a breath. From the broken gate, a step forward. And that step was named Guilliman. The Primarch did not rise to avenge Cadia. He rose because there was no longer anything else. When the Cicatrix Maledictum split the galaxy, it didn't just blind it. It shattered its spine. Astropathic calls for help blurred into warp screams. Forge worlds went dark. Space Marine chapters lost contact with Terra. Trade routes became extinction corridors. There was no strategy left, only salvage, and at the center of it all, the reborn son of the Emperor awoke. Guilliman's return was not salvation. It was continuation, a decision, a march, a crusade, but not the old kind. This was not about reclaiming territory. This was not about banners, parades, or the illusion of unity. This was about triage, saving what could be saved, and burying what couldn't. He did not speak Cadia's name immediately, not in speeches, not in manifestos, not in edicts. But the war gear of the Indomitus Crusade told the story. Cadian lasguns issued by the tens of thousands. Cadian doctrine embedded in new Tactica scripts. Cadian burial rites adopted by Primaris chaplains. And the word stand carved into armor not as decoration, but as warning. Guilliman walked among the shattered, listened, watched. He found survivors in cryovoids, in burned-out casa husks still drifting in orbital decay. Some saluted, some wept, some refused to kneel. None asked for orders. They already had won it. End this. The Indomitus Crusade burned across the stars. Warp anomalies, tyrannid incursions, heretic strongholds, demon-forged war zones. Guilliman led from the center, but the edges, the sharpened tips of every offensive, they were Cadian, not by population, not by majority, but by tone. Other regiments still honored chain of command, still sang the hymns. The Cadians did not. They didn't sing, they didn't pray. They killed, advanced, and killed again. No war chants, No ceremony, just fire. They weren't statues. They weren't relics. They were fuse lines, cut too short, burning from both ends. And Guilliman used everyone. Some criticized it, called them unstable, called them unhinged, called them dangerous. He agreed and kept sending them in. The new Imperium did not rise from terror. It rose from Cadia's grave, because every system the Crusade saved, every stronghold it rebuilt, every child born under an Imperium banner that wasn't forged in ignorance, walked the path Cadia made with its death. The survivors never claimed victory, never raised banners, never rewrote the past. They just marched across burning moons, through warp-washed ruins, into battles they could not win, and sometimes didn't need to, because it wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about meaning, and the galaxy began to shift. Not toward peace, never peace, but toward direction. A feeling that, for the first time in 10,000 years, the Imperium was moving again. Not drifting and not decaying, not holding on, pushing forward, and under every push, every charge, every new front line, lay dead Cadians, still buried beneath cassettes, still orbiting in fragment shells, still sealed in void coffins lost to half-mapped space. They were not mourned, not as individuals. They were utilized. Their death became policy. Their memory became momentum. Their bones laid the road. No one said it aloud, but Guilliman knew. So did the chaplains. So did the senior officers. So did the scribes rewriting doctrinal texts in lightning-lit librariums far from terror. They all understood. The Imperium stands now, because Cadia did not. It's easy to call it a tragedy. A fortress world, 10,000 years loyal. 1 million dead in a single night. A planet shattered, not conquered. But tragedy implies inevitability. Cadia wasn't inevitable. It was necessary, not to win, to end something, to force the Imperium to move again, to sever the last chains tying it to a false vision of permanence, to break the idea that holding on was the same as surviving. Cadia had to die, because the Imperium refused to live. For 10,000 years, the fortress world was the plug in the dam, the buffer, the backstop, the myth of security that let terror ignore the eye of terror. And it worked. So well that the Imperium forgot it was a war machine, forgot that sacrifice is not currency. It is a door. You walk through it, or you get sealed inside. Cadia was the door, and someone had to break it. Abaddon didn't destroy Cadia out of spite. He destroyed it because he understood it. He knew that as long as the gate stood, the Imperium would stall, would delay, would reinforce, would waste. And that suited him just fine. For 12 crusades, he let them believe they were holding, let them feel victory, let them imagine time was theirs to manage. Then, on the 13th, he closed the loop, not by conquering, by removing the crutch. The Imperium had built an entire war doctrine on the belief that Cadia would stand. Supply chains, battle fleet vectors, Astartes deployment patterns, void shield calibration, relic forecasting. It was all built around one fixed point. And when that point failed, the galaxy had no choice but to wake up. That was the function of Cadia's death, to eliminate the fallback, to cut off retreat, to burn the maps that told the Imperium where it used to be, so it would have no choice but to chart where it needed to go. It was not sabotage, it was evolution through obliteration. The Blackstone didn't just fracture the planet, it fractured complacency. The ecclesiarchy had to admit its rituals had limits. The Mechanicus had to acknowledge it no longer understood the galaxy. The Navy had to face its own obsolescence. The Inquisition had to split into factions just to stay functional. Even the Adeptus Astartes had to adapt, facing warp-born threats no codex could explain. And above them all, the High Lords of Terror had to realize they were not prepared for what came next, because Cadia wasn't just a place, it was a warning, one ignored for 10,000 years. Guilliman understood this. He never said it aloud. But his actions spoke for him. He didn't rebuild Cadia. He didn't avenge it. He used it, turned its end into inertia, its silence into a spark. The Indomitus Crusade was not launched in glory. It was launched in grief weaponized. Because sometimes you don't get to keep what protects you. Sometimes the shield breaks, so that the sword finally swings. Cadia was too valuable to survive. Too important to be allowed to linger. Too sacred to remain a symbol of stability. The Imperium didn't need a fortress. It needed a martyr. One the entire galaxy would be forced to remember. A world that wasn't lost in vain, but spent with purpose. So why did Cadia have to die? Because nothing else would have been enough. Because no decree, no crusade, no resurrection, no Primarch could do what one planet falling did. It proved that standing still is just dying slower. There is no monument, no tomb, no shrine orbiting a grav anchor with eternal flame and golden script. No cathedral hulk drifting in the void with songs on loop. Cadia has no grave. Because Cadia has no body. The wreckage still circles. Fragments of cassers, twisted steel hulls, chunks of mountain that once held trench lines older than most Imperial worlds. A few data looms spin in the dark, logging nothing. A few vox pylons ping frequencies no one responds to. The silence is not reverent, it's final, and the galaxy has moved on. But something is missing, a weight, a structure, a point of reference that, though gone, still defines the space around it. Cadia was more than a shield. It was the map itself. Now, the Imperium is a scatter of torchlight across a gale. It isn't holding, it's chasing, burning, lashing out in all directions, and even Guilliman cannot unify what was never whole. In its absence, other fortresses have tried to rise. Casa Vortigar on Vigilus, the Argent Bastion on Nihilus's edge. Crusade-throned warships built around relic-sealed command chambers. None last, none echo. Because the galaxy doesn't want another Cadia. It wants what Cadia meant, and no one has words for that. There is a phrase now, whispered across Vox channels when a battle turns. When an impossible stand is made. When retreat is not an option. There is no gate. It doesn't mean despair. It means we are it now. No shield left. No one between us and the eye. Cadian survivors never say the phrase. They don't need to. Their silence carries it in full. In segmentum briefings, Strategium reports refer to the post-Cadian era as the era Indomitus, the Age of Wounds, the time of the Rift. High Lords debate terminology. Scripture is amended. Tactica files are rewritten. But the Psychers still flinch when they speak the name. Cadia isn't gone. It's lodged in the timeline. A tear that never sealed. A fact that replays behind every new doctrine. Even the traitor legions speak of it differently. Not as a victory, but a shift. They don't boast of the fall, they reference it. As if Cadia's death was a mechanism, not a moment. Abaddon never gloated, because Abaddon never won. He completed something. And now the rest of the galaxy has to live in the world that came after. The Blackstone is silent. The eye continues to bleed. And the rift is now a fixture, carved across the stars like a scar that refuses to fade. But the echo of Cadia persists, not in light, not in records, in behavior. An entire generation of soldiers has grown up hearing it secondhand, not history, tone. The clipped way a veteran checks a lasgun, the way an officer looks at an impossible map and doesn't blink. The moment a regimental priest doesn't bless the squad before battle, because he knows they already burned that prayer on Cadia. The world without a gate is not more fragile, it's more honest. The Imperium no longer imagines a buffer, no longer dreams of containment. It has seen the edge of the storm, and become the storm in reply. What replaced Cadia? Nothing. That was the point. Cadia wasn't meant to be succeeded. It was meant to be the last threshold. The point past which survival becomes reckoning. In every war zone, in every regimental hymn, in every moment a soldier refuses to yield, the phrase returns. Cadia stands, not in denial, in defiance. A battle cry with no planet left to echo it. A truth carved from annihilation. A message. We didn't survive you. We became what comes after you. Cadia is gone. But the galaxy has learned to move without a gate. And every time it does, every time it refuses to break, every time it kills back harder than it should be able to. Cadia stands, still,